Since it's the holidays, I figured it would be a good time to talk about my top 10 traps from Home Alone 1 and 2. Hey everybody, Blood Moon Bobby here. So I had such a good time making that top 10 Pikmin enemies list with my sis that I figure I'd do one on my top 10 traps from Home Alone 1 and 2. So those two movies, Home Alone 1 and 2, are among my favorite Christmas films. I remember watching them as a kid, growing up with them with my dad and sis, and just watching them every Christmas. I think sometimes when it wasn't Christmas, because I had a good time. I'm laughing at the movie. The movie definitely had its really sincere, sweet moments, and as I've gotten older and related to them more, they've become tearjerkers in my eyes. But some of the most famous scenes from the Home Alone films has been the traps that the villains have had to put up with over the years, and of course they're really comedic. I love how nowadays, as people have gotten, as you know, the people who watched them as kids now look back on them and look at them from a more realistic context. They look at them and say, "Oh my God, if somebody did those traps in real life, if somebody could get seriously injured or even die." And they make Kevin McAllister out to be like this kind of psychopath, and I find that humorous. But which of those traps do I think are the best? Well, I'm going to talk about my top 10 traps from Home Alone 1 and 2 today. I'm mostly going to be focusing on the first two films since those are the ones that I've seen and grown up with. I haven't heard very many good things about the other sequels, 3, 4, and 5. I think I saw the fourth one a really long time ago, like when they first came out. I barely remember it except for the ending when Kevin in the movie makes it snow. But this video will be more so focusing on the first two films. So without further ado, here are my top 10 traps from Home Alone 1 and 2. Number 10, Harry slipping on ice, one of the very first traps in the original Home Alone. It's the one where when Harry tries to enter Kevin's house, he slips on the steps and does a great fall. And it's a really simple trap when you get down to it. Basically what Kevin did is he just splashed water all over his front steps, and of course because it's cold outside, Harry would slip on it. What I get a kick out of the most is mainly the reactions and just what happens when Harry slips. Like, I remember the first time Harry slips, he does this huge scream, like he's walking up, you think he's gonna get in, but then slip, ah! And he just falls on the concrete like. And then later on, he tries again and to get up to the front step. Tries getting up there, but then slips again and hits his head and falls on the ground again. And then he makes a third attempt, and well, we'll get back to that third attempt later on in this video. Number 9, a really infamous one, the nail from the first Home Alone. So after Marv is able to get into Kevin's basement, he climbs up these steps to go to the main floor of his house, and the steps are covered in tar, so he's losing his shoes, he's losing his socks, and he's he's climbing the rest of the stairs barefoot, and then he steps on this nail ever so slightly, and yeah, it's really one of those traps where people look back on and say, "Oh my God, this is a really psychopathic one." I've even heard there's people who can't watch the scene to this day. It's not bloody or anything, but I could see why and see how painful it is. And funny thing enough, as a kid who grew up saying, "Please don't show me blood on the screen, please don't show me blood on the screen," I never had a problem watching that trap because I thought, oh, he just missed it. It isn't that he stepped on it, but he just stopped before his foot got in. But no, actually what happens is Marv's foot, the nail doesn't like go through his foot or anything, but it just ever so slightly punctures his foot. And I also really like Marv's reaction. He looks down, he's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then when he comes back up, he's like, "Ah!" And he falls on the floor, grabbing his foot in pain. So, oh yeah, another really great trap, really painful one at that. But yeah, it's definitely one of the most infamous traps in the original Home Alone. Number 8, the Brick Brigade from Home Alone 2. When Harry and Marv meet up at Kevin's relatives' abandoned house, they see him up there Harry tries to get Kevin to throw down his Polaroid camera, but instead, what does Kevin do? Picks up a brick and starts throwing a brick one by one at Marv, and of course it hits his head and makes him dizzy and fall over. It's literally one of those traps when people look back on and they say, wow, if you did this in real life, you could seriously hurt or even kill somebody. Brains may go splattering down on the street. And even though when you get down to it, yeah, it does seem like a really simple trap compared to all the elaborate stuff in the Home Alone movies, it is one of the more enjoyably sadistic ones. And of course, Kevin throws 3 more bricks one at a time, and a lot of the humor also comes from Marv squealing in pain and him being dizzy. On the first one, he's really dizzy. Harry looks at him and says, "How many fingers am I holding up, Marv?" And Marv says, 8, because he's really dizzy and he can't tell how many fingers that Harry is really holding up. And of course, with each brick toss, Marv squeals in pain. And on the last one, they initially think that Kevin no longer has any bricks. Like, Harry is like, come on, Marv, or the kid has no more bricks. And then Kevin is about to throw the last one, the 4th one. Marv sees that and starts speaking gibberish, and it's like, and gets hit by the last brick. So, yeah, another it may seem like a really simple trap, but it's all still one of the more enjoyably humorous ones from the second Home Alone. Number 7, the BB gun from the first Home Alone. Again, one of the first traps from the first film. So Harry and Marv are kind of taunting Kevin outside his back door and saying, "Merry Christmas, it's Santa Claus and his elf who let us in." But of course, Kevin knows better, and he sticks this BB gun, I think it's his brother Buzz's BB gun, out the doggy door and shoots Harry in the nuts. And Harry does that because Joe Pesci can't curse in a PG movie. He does that Yosemite Sam gibberish swearing where he's like, "Oh!" And so Marv tries and sees what's going on. He doesn't quite understand what's going on, and he peeks his head through the door, as you can see from my screenshot. Kind of gives a really strange smile, and Kevin is like, "Hello," and shoots him in the head with the BB gun. So really great, really humorous way to get the ball rolling in the first Home Alone. Number 6, speaking of getting shot in the nuts, the staple gun from the second Home Alone. So it's another one of those, it's one of those traps where as a kid I could kind of sense, how much pain Marv was in, but I still found it really funny anyway. So what happens in this trap is that Marv tries to go into Kevin's relative's abandoned home by going through the front door. He pulls on the handle, but for whatever reason, the handle is just attached to some string, and he's like, "What's going on?" He keeps pulling and pulling, it gets to more string, and then it stops. And then when he gives it one last strong yank, a staple comes shooting out and shoots him in the ass, and he screams in pain. They come back later, he turns around, and then another staple comes out and shoots him in the nuts, and Marv falls over, and one last staple shoots him in the nose. So even though I could kind of sense the pain that Marv was in, it was still one of those traps that I thought was pretty funny as a kid. And of course, when I look back, I could sense how much pain Marv was in, especially the last 2 ones, getting shot in the nuts, and the one where it's it gets shot between his nose, and they actually show later on that he pulls the thing out, and I just look at the sharp edges of that staple, and I'm just ooh, that's really painful. Number 5, Marv slipping on soap in Home Alone 2, and this one really just defies all logic to me. So after Marv is able to get into the house, he starts slipping on the soap, and he's like, "Yeah, what's going on? I'm slipping." And then he stops and then starts slipping again, and he falls. Now, I could understand him, slipping and falling on soap because slippery stuff. But the part that just kind of boggles my mind, especially when I rewatch this trap today, he, goes for a ride. He doesn't just slip and fall, but he goes, sliding across the floor, screaming, and hits this cabinet with paint cans. It falls over. Marv is like, "Uh-oh," and the paint cans fall on him, and he's just completely doused in paint. So it's really one of these traps. I mean, the thing about the Home Alone traps is that I don't think they're meant to be taken seriously. It's much more like a cartoon. But it just kind of boggles my mind in a sort of playful way. It's like, what caused Marv to slip and go down this ride? I mean, yeah, I could understand slipping and falling, but like, what caused him to like get dragged across the floor? It's like he's getting dragged by like some kind of moving object or something or the other. So it's just really crazy stuff. Number 4. Marv versus the Christmas ornaments in the first Home Alone. So another one of these traps where Marv is trying to get into the house, and this time he's able to by going in through one of Kevin's windows. What he doesn't notice is when he jumps in, he steps on all these Christmas ornaments, and of course he's screaming in pain. And honestly, come to think of it, after stepping on the nail, it's probably even more painful. So he's screaming and he shouts, "I'm gonna kill that kid!" And he actually like steps on like I think at least one more ornament along the way. So even though like it is a funny trap and I still laugh at it today, this is another one of those where I could kind of sense the pain as a kid, because as a kid I was constantly told, hey, if you accidentally break a dish or a glass cup, don't step on it. Because you'll cut your foot, and my parents would always tell me that. So to see something very similar like that happen to Marv, where he steps on a bunch of glass as objects, it just, yeah, I could really like sense how painful it was. But again, in a very like sort of humorous way. Number 3. Harry versus the doorknob in the first Home Alone. So I mentioned before, Harry was struggling to get into the front door of Kevin's house, and on the third attempt, he thinks that he's made it. But what happens is he's about to open the front door. What Harry doesn't know is that the doorknob has been heated by some sort of lighter, and he touches it and burns his hand, and of course he's screaming in pain. He tries to like this is gonna sound really wrong, blow the smoke up and go like and of course he falls over back into the snow and dips his hand into the snow to try to extinguish the heat. An interesting note is this is one of the few traps that actually has literally scarred Harry permanently, because when we get to Home Alone 2, there's a scene where Kevin is trying to escape the Plaza Hotel, and when he jumps out, he lands in the clutches of Harry, and we see the burn. There's this M-shaped burn on his hand, and it's the one trap that has followed him to another movie. And me being a dumb little kid, unfortunately, this is one of the traps that I actually kind of imitated myself. I remember watching the first Home Alone with my parents, and I was laughing at, the scene where Harry touches the doorknob, and I ended up touching a light bulb. Was super painful. I had to put my hand on a cold watermelon to cool down, because I didn't realize that, oh yeah, if you try this in real life, this is going to be really painful, as is with many of the traps in the first 2, if not all, the Home Alone movies. So don't try that at home, kids. Number 2. Marv getting electrocuted in Home Alone 2. So after getting doused by paint, Marv is trying to find some way to clean it off. He finds like a paper towel, but of course that's not sufficient enough. So he comes across the sink, he's about to turn it on. What he doesn't realize is that Kevin has rigged it with this electric generator. And so when he touches the sink, he starts getting electrocuted and getting shocked and shaking around, and it's going really crazy. Kevin, rather sadistically, he continues to turn up the power on this generator. And it all leads up to Marv temporarily getting turned into this screaming skeleton. And after that, Kevin turns it off. Marv continues to shake and he falls over. So it's one of the it's one of the most famous traps from the second Home Alone. I get a kick out of how extreme things get. I mean, literally for a second, Marv turns into a skeleton, and it's just really crazy stuff. And the number 1 trap from the first 2 Home Alone films is the scene where Harry gets blown up in the second Home Alone. And so this time Harry is playing around with the light switches, checking to make sure or that, nothing blows up or nothing goes crazy or anything like that. And he's playing with the light switches, turning them on. Nothing seems terrible. But then he comes into this bathroom. He turns on this one light switch and this blowtorch lights his head on fire. He looks in the mirror and realizes that his head is ablaze and he's screaming. He tries turning on the sink to no avail. So he dips his head in this toilet and does this big handstand. I'm not really sure why he couldn't just lean into the bowl like this, but does this handstand, dips his head, and then kaboom! Boom. What he doesn't know is that that toilet water is actually kerosene, and that's what caused the explosion, and it's what causes his face to get completely scorched and him to squeal in pain like... So it's another one of these Home Alone traps that really just cuts off the bungee cord of all logic to me, just in terms that, like, you would think that in real life, an explosion doesn't just blow up and go away. Like, you would think that it would set the house ablaze, but according to Home Alone logic, it just kind of fades away after the big blow up. And yes, obviously Harry's face is scorched, but this really does look like the kind of trap that could potentially hurt, if not kill, everybody that's in that house. But yeah, so again, so it's really funny trap. I think a lot of the humor comes from just not only how extreme this trap is leading to a big explosion, but just in terms of how, by this movie's logic, the explosion just kind of like fades away after it explodes. It doesn't just set the house on fire. And I know another really famous trap from the first Home Alone that's really similar to this one is when Harry gets his head lit on fire in the first film. You might have seen that in some memes put on Twitter. And as much as I do like that one, and it's humorous, and I like Joe Pesci screamers like, ah! And he's like panicking and wobbling around and dips his entire head into the snow, I kind of prefer the one in the second Home Alone, not only, because, we get a very similar situation where his head gets set ablaze, but it's also... it goes the extra mile by just defying all logic and just having like an explosion that just goes away after a second, and Harry just gets left with basically a scorched face and a ruined hat. So these are my top 10 traps from Home Alone 1 and 2. What did you personally think of them? Were there any ones that you think I missed? Were there any good ones in Home Alone 3, 4, and 5? Leave all those thoughts down below, and until next time, this has been Blood Moon Bobby, and thank you all for watching. Hi everyone, thanks for watching this Blood Moon Bobby video. Like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel to see more of my videos, and ring the bell to be notified about my latest uploads. Don't forget to follow me on social media for my latest opinions and video updates. I hope to see you next time.